You ready?
What are we talking about this time?
Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of What's the Point? The intersection of faith and life. Thanks for joining us on this podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, we're thankful for you. I am your host, John Muth, and joining me is my exceptional co-host,
Trey Fall.
I think you're extra exceptional, actually.
Oh, why? Tell me. Give me some compliments, John. You're never nice to me on this podcast.
Your hair is on fleek. Do the kids still say on fleek?
I don't know.
My kids don't.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think I missed that term.
Oh, yeah? That's a good one.
Cool enough, and now I'm definitely not cool enough.
I'm not cool enough.
Not cool enough.
No, that's from a movie. So we're back here for part 2 of our episode on grief. Now, here's the news. Trey, over to you.
Yes, we are back for part 2 with Brian Farrell and Bob Mucci, which Bob Mucci I think is one of the funnest names to say. Mucci.
Mucci?
Mucci.
Mucci.
Mucci. So if you missed episode 1, go back, hear their story, get some of the context, and then come right back and watch episode 2 of What's the Point as we take a deeper dive into their experience with grief and what they kind of learned about God and faith throughout the whole process. So here's our conversation with Bob and Brian.
Mucci. And we are back. We're here with Brian Farrell and Bob Mucci. Thanks for coming back on, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
For you eagle-eyed viewers out there, if you are watching instead of listening, you'll notice that we were all wearing the same shirts as we were as last week.
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. I mean,
How can that be?
almost like we recorded it on the same day.
I got a bunch of stuff in my laundry. This is the only thing I left.
So we're just going to jump right back in. We're going to dive a little deeper into your stories and how you have dealt with grief. So Bob, first question: as you were grieving your loss, what were your thoughts about God? Were there any moments of doubt for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think there was a lot of doubt because right from the get-go, I did not want to go back into the pain of the loss. I wanted to run from it. It was so difficult to go through the exact shock of losing my child at that moment that anything I could do to avoid looking at that again or feeling that kind of pain, I was going to do. I didn't understand that pain wasn't going to go away. I didn't have someone telling me that. And I figured that, even though I was working for Children's Hospital and I was doing the things that I thought were helping other people and I was learning from other people, that was really a mechanism for me to avoid looking at myself. Because if I can look at you, a great defense is a good offense. And besides doing that, I got wrapped up in drugs and alcohol that numbed me from the pain. And it wasn't until I really joined AA and started the process of coming out of my drug addiction and alcoholism that I took up the process of grieving. And for the people watching, if you're stuck in the grieving process like I was for 10 years.
10 years, wow, yes, I was going to ask.
Yeah, 10 years I was in the grieving process. But if you're stuck, please don't wait 10 years. It's not a healthy thing to be in. But I can guarantee you that going through the process from my standpoint now, having completed it, is not nearly as bad as I imagined it was going to be.
For those that are stuck, what was that? Like, I know you got an AA, but what was that breaking point for you where you said, I got to face this?
Well, I think there was a couple of things. I mean, first of all, God got me into AA. My best thinking, I would have kept drinking and drugging because I was happy not feeling. And eventually, God turned my life around. There was a point I couldn't take it anymore, and I got what I call the Gift of Desperation by God. He gave me that gift and said, okay, you need to change your life. And after that, things started turning around for me positively. I started getting more of a connection with God. I started learning about God. I was praying every day because the program suggested that, and I was doing everything it suggested. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a seminar, and we took a break. There was probably like 300 people at this seminar. I was at a hotel, and we took a break. And a woman came up to me during the break while we were having coffee and said, "Hey, did you lose a son?" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, did you have a son that passed?" And I said, "I did." And she said, I just want to let you know, he was on your lap the whole time. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? And that was struck me, because she didn't know me from Adam. She wasn't even from the state. How would she know that? And she described him to a T. Blonde hair, he was small, he was probably 2 to 3 years old. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I knew at that point that he was with God. I just knew.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And since then, things have turned around for me. But
Brian, what about you?
Well, that is just so good to hear, the gift God will give, and things that none of us really want to accept.
Right.
But, gratefully I had the gift of desperation years prior to what had happened with my son. So I had a head full of knowledge of program ease, and also a lot of Bible reading, which I am so grateful for, because not to equate myself with David or any of these others, but it was truly a help. Joseph's life, the bitter pill of his life all the way through, and how he dealt with it, always positive, always good. What people meant for bad, God meant for good. And I couldn't run from those and from those lessons. And I also had God's people who he put in my life at the time, who were on top of me to don't rush it. Don't shut it off. Brian, don't hide. Feel it. Go through it. And he put people like that, and like Bob's person, in my life as well, which gave me such peace. A gift.
Yeah. So you were able to start the grieving process
Pretty quick. Yeah, a couple weeks after, actually, realizing it wasn't just me suffering. The kids in the bus, people in the town, family. I was not alone in my suffering.
Yeah.
So that made a difference in my thinking. And
so would you say your faith stayed pretty strong through it all? I mean, obviously you have questions, and
oh yeah,
you were praying with God, but did you doubt him?
Did I doubt? No, I didn't doubt. I certainly questioned. But I would have a doubt that there was a God, or that what God is doing is what God does. No doubt whatsoever. Didn't in particularly, and I still don't care for it.
Yeah.
But it's God. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
I still am going to worship him because of who he is.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the book of Job, he says, "Where were you?" When
Exactly.
I created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
Because he's God.
Yeah. Exactly.
so, Brian, let me ask for you.
Yes.
Was the process of grieving, like starting at point A and getting to the end, or do you think it
There's
was
no
more
end.
cyclical, where you circle back and you keep going through it, or?
I found at first somewhat it could have been cyclical. But as I've gone a few years, it's only been a little more than 5 years, it's not that the pain is diminished, it's softer. The questioning will always be, and I don't foresee a complete end. Because honestly, there is no end.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me,
It's like that splinter you talked about in episode 1.
just stays in there.
This is episode 8. It's part 1.
Part 1, episode 8, sorry.
The Good Grief podcast. Good Grief Charlie Brown
Charlie Brown.
podcast, part 1.
Yeah.
Episode 8, what's the point? That's
Yeah.
the whole title.
Oh my word, that's amazing.
Bob, you're really good at asking questions. I think you should just ask the rest. We're just gonna. I'm gonna eat jelly beans and just watch you guys work.
Bob, answer your own question.
You can't do that.
Yeah, so for me, it
Oh,
was
okay.
it was really cyclical. You know, when I did start grieving, I mean, one of the things that somebody suggested that I took the suggestion. I was open to anything when I started the grieving process. And then again, this was 10 years after the loss of my son. But somebody said to me, write a letter.
Yeah.
And that was just soul cleansing, I can tell you. I have never felt as relieved when I was done with it. Because, you know, with any loss of someone close, I think people go through what I've been told and what I experienced was some sort of guilt on my own part. What should I have done that was different? Could I have done something different? You know, what didn't I do that I regret not having done? And you know, there's no good way to die, is one of the things that I've figured out. Because, you know, if you know death is coming, like in my situation where my son was pretty certain he wasn't going to survive that operation, I had an opportunity to do everything with him for the summertime and say everything I needed to say, but the process of waiting for that to happen was emotionally turmoil for me. It was like watching the old-time movie where a calendar is on the wall and the pages are getting ripped off by day and it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
I've never seen that movie.
I'll send you the
Send you the clip.
I mean, and the other way is Brian.
Yeah.
You know, he sends his son out in the morning and he doesn't come home.
Yeah.
So there's no, you know, and then he misses out on all the things if I didn't say, I didn't get to do, I should have done, and there's no good way to die.
Let me have a caveat to that, and this is very important. Do not ever put off what you want to do with your children. And I can honestly say I have just about zero regrets because I did things with my son. I took him places and did things with him.
Yeah.
And gratefully I did have the head full of knowledge and I could live in that manner. Thank you, Lord. So there are no regrets in that way. So if you know, you're wondering, oh, I can't afford it. You'll never afford it. Do it. Just do it.
It's good.
Because it's that short.
No, it's much more difficult for me with my 3 daughters that I don't get to see than it is for my son at this point. My son is 30 years ago, my son died. I've found a place in my heart for that event. It still hurts from time to time. It hurt today, you know. But with my daughters, it's really hard because they're out there. They're still out there, and I don't have any contact with them. So for people grieving the loss of a relationship, the only thing I can say is the thing that I try to remind myself every day is that God says to me, today is today, and tomorrow is change is coming. And let's just hope that change is good for me.
Yeah.
You know, and nothing is constant. Nothing stays constant. So I have hope for tomorrow. You know, and until that comes, I leave it up to God. God has a plan. And that's it's going to work out the way he wants it to work out. There's nothing I can do to change that. I mean, I do send letters and cards and things like that, but if they go on unanswered, nothing I can really do about that. God has a plan.
You just keep it up.
Yeah, just don't give up.
Never give up.
Brian, I'm interested to know, like, I know you were in Christ and, you know, you said you had that head full of, you know, Bible before all this happened, but what are some new things you've learned about God through all this? What has he been teaching you? What has he taught you?
What has he taught me? Well, I many times have had an unrealistic understanding of him. Maybe a lollipop version or make-believe. He is an all-loving God, and it's in his time. So I can't foresee. I've seen my life here and the way it's running, and God's up here, and, you know, I'm going to be with him at some time. But getting both together is the journey. We say we don't like change. Well, that's all life is
Right.
change, right? Everything the same. What's the same? Someone said this to me so many years ago. You know what grows? We like it all sunny and perfect all the time. You know what grows in the sun all the time? Nothing. It's a desert, right?
That's true.
So, you know, you got to have rain. You have to have changes in life. So what I've come to see with God, in particular Jesus, just to continually lean on him through all things. And when I'm off on my own tangent, I'm just so grateful that he's solid to be there when I come back.
That's good.
You know?
That probably didn't, I mean, did that feeling, that peace come overnight?
Sometimes it's momentary.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a minute at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not. It's, you know, it's just the way it is. But knowing that, even when you're in the, gratefully, when you get off in anger or whatever it is, he's there. And you come back.
Yeah. That's good.
And he's, the greatest picture I see of him is this. This.
Yep. It's the only answer to pain and suffering.
Absolutely.
Found in the cross. Yeah.
The other answer to it is go through it. Don't fear. Fear is our biggest enemy.
Yeah.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And then truly what you find out, what have I got to fear? I'm already in the middle of it.
Yeah.
What am I fearing?
You want to go ahead?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna ask Bob. So looking back,
Sorry.
what are you talking about? Sorry for what? I mean, yes, you should be sorry.
Yeah.
Here, have a jelly bean.
Oh, thank you. Oh, not the red ones.
You're going to have to do some editing.
Looking back on your pain, Bob, you've learned and realized things that you would have never have known in the moment. So to anyone going through pain right now, what would you tell them is the most important thing to remember?
I think for people that are experiencing pain is that there's a few things. Number one, don't let anyone try to pigeonhole you into a process. It's different for everybody. There is no right answer to this. Right. Some people take years. Some people never grieve. Some people get through it in months. You know, there's no right and wrong answers to this. But I think the number one thing that I would tell people that they should fear is isolation. Do not isolate yourself. Talk about it. Reach out to people. People want to help. I think they legitimately want to be there for people going through and suffering. And God put people in our lives to help us. Utilize those people. That's how God works. He works through other people. And if we shut people out, we're really shutting God out.
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing I learned.
Our fearless leader, Shan, always says, when you're isolated, you're vulnerable.
Absolutely. They pick them off the pack that way, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, Bob, you have one last question you want to ask. Why don't you wrap it up for us and take us out of here on a practical note for all of our listeners?
Well, thanks. So, Brian, you were talking earlier about your process of grieving, and I noticed a couple times that you mentioned, more than a couple times, about how people in your life impacted you. And I know that it's really difficult for people who are with others that are experiencing grief because it's an awkward situation. And they don't know how to respond. They don't know what to say. Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to make it worse? You know, what would you tell the listeners about dealing with someone going through grief?
Oh, well, first of all, you have to realize if you're the one helping someone going through grief or being there, as you ask, you're not going to have all the answers. You're not the Almighty. You're not going to make them better. You won't have the answers, and you've got to know that. So more than having talk to them, listen. Let them know you're there for them. And that's all. You're a heart and an ear to hear. I may not have all your answers, but I have a heart for you. And I will pray with you. And I will carry you. Excuse me. Those people carried me. And that's how I got through, on the backs and hearts of others who helped drag me through. And in the same way, that's how we go through. And not as a hero, but as a fellow struggler.
Well said. Well said.
I wanted to be sure to plug Divorce Care, which is a group that meets here at Cross Pointe, which you and your wife Denise lead. And is there anything you want to say about that? I know.
Divorce Care is another another painful part of life that sadly more than half of the people married go through, and it's a very painful time. And Divorce Care is a very laid out, scripturally sound program that is so helpful to see people come in and to bear their burdens with others going through the same thing. They're all at different places. Is marvelous, and it's quite a gift. So I would certainly say it's the same thing as grieving, as Bob said earlier, different types of grief.
Yeah.
And that is a certain, people use how can you get divorced? You're supposed to be a Christian. And the whole bit, it's just so, the dynamics are amazing.
And the fear
The fear, exactly.
comes back into it again, right?
Fear is in everything. What's going to happen to me? Will I be able to live? How can I live with this?
What about my kids?
What about my kids? What are they going to think of me? What about this? It's
fearful.
and there's answers.
That's good.
There's answers.
Well, if you want more info about Divorce Care, you can enter our website, crosspointema.org, or you can email us, info@crosspointema.org. Did you have anything you want to
just
close with?
just before we sign off, we want to be. Can't take you seriously anymore. We do want this podcast to be practical. We want it to be helpful for our listeners in everyday life, and so just a quick summary of what we heard from Bob and Brian about. If you're in the midst of grieving right now, Bob's advice was to know that the process is going to be different for you, and that people grieve in different ways, and that's okay. And then he also said to don't stay isolated. Find people to be with you, find people to care for you, love you. And that was Brian's advice for people who are helping those who are grieving, is to get involved in somebody's life, listen to them, show up, pray with them, and walk through that valley with them. And so if you're grieving, or if you're helping somebody who's grieving, we hope that this has been helpful for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Trey.
Back to you,
Thank you,
Professor.
Trey.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
This has been episode 9 of What's the Point? The intersection of faith and life. And join us next time as we yet again attempt to answer the question, what's the point?
What's the point?
What's the point?
What's the point? Ta-da!